In the annals of human history, few stories capture the extremes of human experience quite like the tale of Joseph, a story of jealousy and brotherly betrayal, slavery and false accusation, imprisonment and ultimate triumph. This is not just an ancient tale, but a profound exploration of dreams, destiny, forgiveness, and the mysterious workings of providence. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll uncover every twist and turn of this extraordinary journey, from favored son to slave, from prisoner to Prime Minister of Egypt. Our story begins in Canaan around 1900 BCE with Jacob, also called Israel, who had 12 sons through 4 different women, his wives Leah and Rachel, and their maidservants Bilhah and Zilpah. This polygamous arrangement created a powder keg of family rivalry. Joseph was the 11th son, but the firstborn of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and this favoritism extended to Rachel's children. When Joseph was 17, Jacob made him a special coat, often called the coat of many colors.
This coat signifies my love for you, my son. Wear it with pride and walk in the ways of the Lord.
Thank you, Father. It's the most beautiful coat I've ever seen. I love it so much.
You deserve it, my son. Wear it well.
Though the Hebrew suggests it was a richly ornamented robe, possibly with long sleeves, indicating someone who didn't do manual labor. This coat was a public declaration of Jacob's favoritism. But Joseph didn't help his own cause. Genesis tells us he brought bad reports about his brothers to their father. Whether these reports were true or not, they certainly didn't endear him to his siblings. Then came the dreams. Joseph had 2 dreams that he unfortunately shared with his entire family. In the first dream, Joseph and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field when Joseph's sheaf stood upright while his brothers' sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it. His brothers immediately understood the implication. "Do you intend to reign over us?" The second dream was even more provocative. The sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to Joseph. Even Jacob, who favored Joseph, rebuked him for this one, saying, "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?"
I dreamed that the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me.
Are you saying we will bow down to you?
Interestingly, Rachel had already died by this point, adding another layer of mystery to the dream's meaning. These dreams ignited a hatred so intense that his brothers could not speak a kind word to him. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were grazing flocks near Shechem, about 50 miles north. When they saw him coming from a distance wearing that hated coat, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said mockingly. "Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, intervened. Perhaps feeling the weight of responsibility as the firstborn, he suggested throwing Joseph into a cistern without killing him, secretly planning to rescue him later. They stripped Joseph of his ornate robe and threw him into an empty cistern. While eating their meal, a chilling detail showing their callousness, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelite traders heading to Egypt. Judah proposed selling Joseph rather than killing him. "After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood," Judah reasoned, in a statement dripping with irony given what they were about to do. They sold their brother for 20 shekels of silver, the price of a slave. They slaughtered a goat, dipped Joseph's robe in the blood, and brought it to Jacob, who concluded that Joseph had been torn to pieces by a wild animal. Jacob's grief was inconsolable. "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave," he declared. Meanwhile, Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Here's where the narrative reveals something crucial about Joseph's character. Despite being enslaved, stripped of everything, betrayed by his own family, Joseph didn't give up. Genesis tells us repeatedly that the Lord was with Joseph. Joseph proved so capable and trustworthy that Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household. Everything Joseph touched prospered. Potiphar did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph had essentially become the CEO of Potiphar's estate. Genesis adds an interesting detail. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome. This detail matters for what comes next. Potiphar's wife noticed Joseph. Day after day, she propositioned him, "Come to bed with me." But Joseph refused, giving one of the most principled speeches in Scripture. "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" This wasn't just about loyalty to Potiphar. Joseph framed this as a matter of moral integrity before God. But Potiphar's wife persisted daily. One day, when no one else was in the house, she grabbed Joseph by his cloak. He fled, leaving the garment in her hand. The second time a garment would be used as false evidence against Joseph. Scorned and angry, she used the cloak as evidence, accusing Joseph of attempted rape. When Potiphar came home, she told her manufactured story. Joseph's garment, left behind in his escape, now became the instrument of his downfall. Potiphar burned with anger and had Joseph thrown into prison, the royal prison where the king's prisoners were held. Notice that the text doesn't explicitly say Potiphar believed his wife. Some scholars suggest that if Potiphar truly believed Joseph had attempted to assault his wife, the punishment would have been death, not prison. Perhaps Potiphar suspected the truth but couldn't ignore the accusation without losing face. Whatever the case, Joseph went from slave to household manager to prisoner. Yet once again, the text emphasizes, the Lord was with him. Even in prison, Joseph's character shone through. The warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners and everything that happened there. It's remarkable. Joseph had an almost supernatural ability to earn trust and demonstrate competence, regardless of his circumstances. Two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, were imprisoned for offending Pharaoh. One night, both men had dreams, and in the morning, Joseph noticed they were troubled. "We both had dreams," they said, "but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph's response is telling, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer dreamed of a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced grapes. He squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and gave it to him. Joseph interpreted, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position." But Joseph added a plea. "When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison." Encouraged by the favorable interpretation, the chief baker shared his dream. He had 3 baskets of bread on his head, and birds were eating from the top basket. Joseph's interpretation was grim. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, everything happened exactly as Joseph predicted. The cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was executed. But here's the heartbreaking detail. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. For 2 more years, Joseph languished in prison. 2 years of wondering if he'd been forgotten by God and man. 2 years of waiting. The text doesn't tell us what Joseph thought or felt during this time, but imagine the psychological toll. Falsely accused, unjustly imprisoned, forgotten by the one person who could help. This waiting period is crucial. It suggests that timing matters in the unfolding of destiny. Joseph wasn't ready yet, or perhaps Egypt wasn't ready for Joseph. Sometimes the most important preparation happens in the waiting.
After 2 years, Pharaoh himself had 2 disturbing dreams in one night. In the first dream, 7 healthy, fat cows came up from the Nile, followed by 7 gaunt, ugly cows that ate the fat cows, but remained gaunt. In the second dream, 7 healthy, full heads of grain grew on a single stalk, followed by 7 thin, scorched heads of grain that swallowed up the healthy heads. Pharaoh was so troubled that he summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but none could interpret the dreams. This is when the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings," he confessed, then told Pharaoh about the Hebrew slave who had accurately interpreted his and the baker's dreams. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph, who shaved and changed his clothes before appearing before the most powerful ruler in the world. Notice the detail about shaving. Egyptians were clean-shaven, while Hebrews typically had beards. Joseph was adapting to Egyptian customs. "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it," Pharaoh said. "But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's response reveals his character. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Even in this moment that could make or break his future, Joseph deflected credit to God. After Pharaoh recounted both dreams, Joseph provided the interpretation. The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows and 7 good heads of grain represented 7 years of great abundance throughout Egypt. The 7 gaunt cows and 7 worthless heads of grain represented 7 years of famine that would follow. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. But Joseph didn't stop with interpretation. He offered a practical solution. Pharaoh should appoint a discerning and wise man to oversee a plan. During the 7 years of abundance, take a fifth of the harvest and store it. This stored grain would save Egypt during the famine. Pharaoh was impressed. "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" He then did something extraordinary. He said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh gave Joseph his signet ring, dressed him in fine linen robes, put a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. Joseph was 30 years old, 13 years after being sold into slavery. He was given an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and married to Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest. For 7 years, Joseph traveled throughout Egypt, overseeing the collection and storage of grain. The text says he stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. During this time, Joseph and Asenath had 2 sons. He named the firstborn Manasseh, meaning forget, saying, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second he named Ephraim, meaning fruitful, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." These names reveal Joseph's emotional state. He was trying to move on from the pain of his past, yet he couldn't completely forget it. Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph predicted. It struck not only Egypt but all the other lands as well. But because of Joseph's plan, Egypt had food. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. Soon, people from other nations came to Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe everywhere. The stage was set for a reunion that had been brewing for over 20 years. When Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt, he sent 10 of Joseph's brothers to buy food. But he kept Benjamin, Joseph's only full brother, Rachel's other son, at home, fearing that harm might come to him. When the brothers arrived and bowed down before the Egyptian official in charge of grain sales, their faces to the ground, Joseph recognized them immediately. But they didn't recognize him. How could they? They expected never to see him again. They certainly didn't expect the second most powerful man in Egypt to be their brother. Joseph's dreams from 20 years earlier were now being fulfilled. But Joseph wasn't ready to reveal himself. He spoke to them harshly through an interpreter, though he understood Hebrew perfectly, and accused them of being spies. They protested, explaining they were 12 brothers. One was no more, and the youngest was at home with their father. Joseph devised a test. He would keep Simeon as a hostage while the others returned home to bring Benjamin. He also secretly returned their silver by putting it back in their grain sacks. When they discovered the silver on their journey home, their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" Back in Canaan, Jacob refused to send Benjamin. "My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left," he said, revealing that his favoritism had transferred to Benjamin. But the famine was severe, and eventually the grain ran out. Judah, who had suggested selling Joseph, now stepped forward to guarantee Benjamin's safety. "I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him." Reluctantly, Jacob agreed. They took double the amount of silver, gifts for the Egyptian official, and Benjamin. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he ordered a feast prepared at his house. The brothers were terrified. Why were they being brought to the Egyptian official's house? They thought they were being punished for the silver found in their sacks. But Joseph treated them kindly, released Simeon, and seated them at his table in the exact order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest. The brothers were astonished. How could this Egyptian know their birth order? When Joseph saw his full brother Benjamin, he was so overwhelmed with emotion that he hurried to a private room and wept. He washed his face and returned, keeping his composure. Then Joseph pulled one final test. He ordered his steward to fill the brothers' sacks with grain and return their silver again. But in Benjamin's sack, he was to place Joseph's personal silver cup. Shortly after the brothers left, Joseph sent his steward after them to accuse them of stealing his cup. They protested their innocence, even offering that if the cup was found with any of them, that person would die and the rest would become slaves. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. In anguish, they tore their clothes and returned to the city. When they came before Joseph, Judah spoke. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt." But Joseph said, "Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace." Then Judah, the same brother who had suggested selling Joseph, delivered one of the most moving speeches in the Bible. He explained that their father's life was closely bound up with the boy's life, and that if they returned without Benjamin, their father would die of grief. "Now, then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of a boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father." In this moment, Judah, who had once sold his brother, was now willing to sacrifice his own freedom for his brother. The brothers had changed. Joseph could no longer control himself. He ordered all the Egyptians to leave the room, and then he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him outside, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. "I am Joseph," he cried out in Hebrew. "Is my father still living?" His brothers were terrified. They couldn't answer him. They were terrified in his presence. But Joseph said, "Come close to me." And when they came closer, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." This is the theological heart of the story. Joseph reframed his entire experience. The betrayal, slavery, false accusation, imprisonment, all of it, as part of a divine plan. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." He urged them to bring their father and entire family to Egypt, where they would settle in the region of Goshen and be provided for during the remaining 5 years of famine. Joseph and Benjamin embraced and wept, and then Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Only afterward did his brothers talk with him, the tension finally broken. Pharaoh was pleased and provided carts to bring Jacob's family to Egypt. Jacob, hearing that Joseph was alive and ruling Egypt, was stunned. "I'm convinced," he said. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. The story of Joseph is ultimately about providence, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways that suffering can lead to redemption. Joseph endured betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and unjust imprisonment, yet never lost his integrity or his faith. His story shows us that character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in how we respond to injustice and suffering. The family that began with jealousy and hatred ended with reconciliation. The dreamer who was mocked became the savior of his family and of Egypt. And the young man who was sold for 20 pieces of silver became second only to Pharaoh. Joseph's dying words, recorded at the end of Genesis, reveal that despite his success in Egypt, he never forgot where he came from. God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. 400 years later, when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, they carried Joseph's bones with them, a final journey home for the man who saved them all.